Okay, hello everyone. My name's Kate Bleckly. I'm the events assistant here at the Armitt Museum in Ambleside. Today I have with me the archaeologist, Professor David Breeze. Hi David, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hello.
So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the Ambleside Roman fort?
It's survived into modern times absolutely from the Roman period as a sort of bumps in the field at Waterhead rather than Ambleside itself. And just before the First World War, a local man called R.G. Collingwood, Robin Collingwood, started out to excavate it. Now, Collingwood was a very interesting person in his own right. His father was W.G. Collingwood, and the pair of them were, if you like, amateur archaeologists. W.G. was very famous for creating a war memorial after the First World War, which was widely copied. It was in the form of a Celtic cross, and they were very well connected. W.G. Collingwood's mother was Swiss. R.G. Collingwood's sister married an Armenian surgeon, and their children were the exemplars for the children in the Arthur Ransom books, Swallows and Amazons. So he was in this quite eclectic mix, and the final crucial point is that W.G. Collingwood was the secretary to John Ruskin, who lived at Brantwood on Coniston. So they're fully imbibed in Lake District and its lore. This, presumably, the local knowledge and interest led R.G. Collingwood in 1913 to start looking at Ambleside Roman Fort. And there wasn't anything other, I think, behind this apart from a local interest. It's only relatively recently that we've really got into demanding a project design and listing the sort of questions we want to try to answer when we excavate. So it was there, and Collingwood thought he'd like to dig it. And he found there were two main phases. The first dating, he thought, to the 1st century AD, in this case, the late 1st century. And the second phase was the 2nd century and onwards. He really couldn't make a lot of sense of the first phase. There are two ditches going around an enclosure, which he argued was a Roman fort. It fits, and he found some material inside the fort, but he couldn't make much sense of it. So what we have are two ditches, and rather strangely, they run up and seem to include a rocky knoll in the defenses. I mean, this is incredibly unusual in Roman sites, and it's probably he just didn't do enough to be able to understand altogether what he found. I mean, we've got to understand the time. So he would be using workmen, not trained archaeologists, but men either recruited locally, perhaps from farms, or roadmen who knew what they were doing when it came to digging holes. But the holes themselves are incredibly small by our standards, perhaps just 2-3 feet across. And when it came to the defences, these 2 or 3 feet along the line of the defences were not very satisfactory at providing the sort of information we would require today to try to interpret the site. So why did he date it to the 1st century? Whatever it is that he found, that is. The answer to this is that by this time already, when we're looking at 1913, we knew, and people like the Collingwoods knew a lot about the history of Roman Britain. The excavator, R.G. Collingwood, himself went on to write the standard textbook on Roman Britain in the 1930s, called Roman Britain and the English Settlements, published by Oxford University Press. It was still, when I was at university in the 1960s, it was still one of the basic textbooks. So it was imbibed with knowledge of Roman Britain and its history. And he knew that Agricola, Julius Agricola, came to North Britain. He conquered Britain north of roughly the Mersey Humber line in the late 70s AD and marched right up into northern Scotland. And it's in the aftermath of this that Collingwood saw his first fort. So Collingwood quite rightly saw this as a fort being built in the late 70s, early 80s, as part of the network of forts placed across northern England at that time. And it only had a shortish life, perhaps before it was replaced by the remains of the fort, which we can see today. So, and this fort carried on in occupation, so far as we can see, well into the 4th century. Here we are at Ambleside. It's sitting there in a nice location, presumably just above the high water level, and in occupation for a long time. Built probably in the 120s and still in occupation 300 years later. It's difficult to, when we're trying to work out, as I've already said, why forts were occupied for a long time, why they were where they were. We've got to make guesses. Either if they're on the frontier, it's relatively simple to guess. They were defending the province. Forts in the middle of the Lake District, Ambleside, well, we don't really know. We can't answer why it went on for so long. But it did attract a lot of people around it. We've got a group of, let's say, the regiment theoretically contained 480 men. It's probably that it didn't in practice, because we have examples of some regiments from the documents we have survived being 5 or even 20% below strength. So we might actually be looking at somewhere like 360 soldiers in Ambleside, in theory. But again, these soldiers would not be in their barracks all the time. They would be going out collecting food or foraging for food or firewood. Just imagine how much firewood you would need to cook all that food. Quite a lot. And we don't know where they kept the firewood either. It would have to be dry. So some of the storerooms we have in forts might just be there to hold firewood. And then they might be out on patrol talking to local people, making sure everything was peaceful. And we know at one stage at Ambleside, it wasn't peaceful. There's an inscription in the museum which records the death of 2 soldiers, seemingly a father and a son, a centurion, and his son, who was an actuarius. An actuary comes from the same term. It's to do with finance. And an actuarius or actuaris in the Roman Empire was the financial clerk of the unit. So he's, in our terms, a non-commissioned officer, an NCO, something like that. And they were killed in the fort by the enemy. And we have no idea how we seriously can interpret this. Was the area hostile in some, continuing on, perhaps in the 4th century? There's discussion even about the date of the tombstone. Interestingly, the soldiers are called Flavius. So you get a lot of soldiers called Flavius this or that in the early 4th century as a mark of respect, honor of Constantine, but you do get the name earlier. But the feel of it is more 4th century, I think, perhaps. So what's happening? Are bandits coming out of the hills to have a go at the fort? The latest suggestion is that this might relate to civil war at some time, with 2 factions fighting each other. Has happened about 200 and again about 300 AD. That's equally possible. But it's good to have some conundrums that we can argue about. But these soldiers, we've come down to about 300, 360 of them. In many cases, they would marry sometime during their career. Soldiers came into the army the ages between 18 and 21 in the main. There were earlier ones as young as 13. There were much older ones, but most at that time. And after 4 years minimum will be when they could move on to another post. There were a lot of soldiers who specialized. There was even a glazier recorded in the Roman army, carpenters, builders, architects, as well as trumpeters, people who issued the commands by trumpet, a whole absolute range, long, big range, excuse me, of Roman soldiers specializing. So soldiers, after 4, 5, 6 years, they want to act like this. They want to get themselves off the bog standard fatigues, have at this post, which renders them immune from the normal fatigues. And then if they're lucky, they carry on and climb up the ladder. But it's once they've passed these posts and they're in their mid-20s, that one excellent scholar has done work at what time soldiers married. And it's in the later 20s, once they've got their foot on the ladder. Mm. Now, many books will say Roman soldiers couldn't marry. This is total fallacy. What they couldn't do is marry according to Roman law. Now, in the Roman Empire, we had different levels of society. So, okay, slaves at the bottom, at the top's the emperor, of course. It's not easy to find a modern parallel. Getting a Roman citizenship was like being given the MBE, the OBE, or the CBE, something like that, which pushes you up a little bit in society. Or in the other way, I'm very proud to be a Lancastrian. So if you like, that's my city, but I'm obviously also a British citizen. So you had this duality. So Roman soldiers could marry according to local custom. And the Roman documentation makes this absolutely clear, because when the soldier at Ambleside in the 2nd century AD, let's say, retired, he was given Roman citizenship. And he was allowed to marry according to Roman law, even, and this was extended to the woman he might already have, and any children he might already have also became Roman citizens. So it's a very pragmatic way of the Roman army dealing with the world. So soldiers contracted unions with women who presumably mostly lived outside in the civil settlement, and it extends right the way north of Ambleside. We know from finds to some sort of earthwork at the north side of Waterhead, I should say, rather than Ambleside. But other people would come as well. So merchants wanting to sell goods. Roman soldiers quite well paid. If you've ever been to Pompeii or Ostia, you'll see these fast food shops. There will be some of those at Ambleside civil settlement. A priest would come and establish 4 temples, and of course prostitutes for soldiers as well. So there'll be a thriving community of innkeepers, people selling food, butchers, perhaps, and so on. And these lived outside the fort.
Is there any movement or communication that we can see between Ambleside, Hardknott and Ravenglass? Or were they quite isolated? Can we see any differences between the kind of the cultures in these forts?
Well, we don't know enough really about the cultures. Ambleside was excavated between 1913 and 1920. We've got the same sort of basic cultural items, pottery vessels for cooking in or eating in, or imports like the big wine jars bringing material in, those sort of things, knives and weapons. They are linked. Hadrian's Wall was started to be built at any rate, about the time, possibly a little before the visit of the Emperor Hadrian. The 1900th anniversary of the visit of Hadrian is this year, 122. And the forts he ordered to be built didn't just stop at Bowness on Solway, but continued right the way down the coast to Ravenglass. And then Hardknott was plugged in to link Ravenglass to Ambleside. So we had a coherent system of military deployment, and largely with the same cultural values, because they were all soldiers in the Roman army.
And what influence on Ambleside can we see that the Romans might have left there from their occupation?
The civilian community attached to every unit. When a Roman army unit moves on, it generally takes its dependents with it, because they're the women and the families of the soldiers. They just go with them. Beyond those, there will be fields. We have quite a lot of Roman forts where we have evidence for what we would call horticultural plots, small fields, as well as larger ones where vegetables, presumably, and specialized items of food would be grown for the soldiers. What we must remember is when the Roman soldiers arrived here, somewhere around, let's say 80 AD, farming had been carried out for the previous 4,000 years. They moved into a landscape which was probably not that different from today. Smallish fields, small farms dotted across the landscape, stands of trees. The tree cover, 10% of trees then is about the same as today. Trees will be required for, you needed to keep trees to provide firewood, for example, and timber for building. So in many ways, the landscape would not, once you take out the modern buildings of urban buildings, the landscape would not be that different from today, I suspect. You know, we see a lot of trees in the Lake District, but not most of them didn't come there until a couple of 100 years ago, when it was beautified.
At the Armitt, we have quite a lot of the excavation finds from the site. I was wondering whether there's anything that in particular sticks out to you as being something quite significant in the collection that you know of.
Yes. Well, the one for me, of course, is that tombstone, which is unique, to my knowledge, in the whole of the Roman Empire. I mean, we don't know of another inscription which says that soldiers were killed in a fort by the enemy, which is why it is absolutely so fascinating. The rest in the main are what one would expect to find in a Roman fort. My first boss would say to me, David, when you're visiting a castle or an abbey, you always find out what is the most significant item, and that's what you home in on. And in your case, you've got not just a significant item, you've got a unique item, and that's what I would certainly home in on.
Yeah. The tombstone is fantastic, and for anyone that's not visited the Armitt, you can actually see it on exhibition at the moment. Is there anything else in maybe in the secure store in the rest of the collections?
Yeah, well, ironically, I go for something which is not actually Roman artifact, but it's Beatrix Potter's drawings of Roman artifacts, which again is, it quite remarkable, and of course not normally associated with her. I mean, you have the drawings and they come out on display, but most people see a different side of Beatrix Potter and not that. So you've got 2 pluses so far.
Yeah, I mean, I had no idea that she'd done those archaeological drawings. So the first time I saw them, I was quite taken aback.
Yeah, I would say that the fort at Ambleside is well worth visiting. It's looked after by the National Trust, and it's recently they've had a program of work in consolidating the Roman walls, and notice boards exist there, and it's just so easy to get to. I'm not sure when my first visit to the fort was, but my first visit to the Lake District was certainly when I was 10 or a little before, and we would regularly, in those days, get the train from Blackpool to Lakeside, get the steamer up to Waterhead, and then we'd go for a walk to look at the Roman fort. So I've been looking at Roman forts in some time in the mid-1950s, and I go, when I'm ever in that area, I go there. It's always good to see it again and revitalize yourself by seeing these really good remains dating back nearly 2,000 years. It's quite something that they're still there and visible. So I would simply say to everybody, if you haven't been, you could have a good day out and go to the Armitt and see the finds from the fort as well.
Yeah, there's something quite special. Well, thank you so much, David. This has been really interesting, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed.